So yeah, Jim, as we've done in the last couple of episodes, we've got a seven episode series in our podcast right now because we're trying to get the word out about some of the programs that we're building and how we are intending to help men and what types of men that we're intending to help. And that's all a work in progress. But this is the fourth podcast in the series, and we've got five topics to cover, and then we had the introductory "This is what we're doing" podcast episode, and then we talked about health, and the last podcast we talked about worldview, and today we're going to talk about profession. And after we finish with the five core, then we're going to talk about the concept of agency and the idea that all of us, including you and me, need some objective third party to negotiate and represent us on our behalf so that we can take our emotion out of it. And there's more to it than that. And we can get into that if you would like in this particular episode. But today we're going to talk about profession.
Mhm.
And in the category of profession, emanating from the center of our flywheel, which is the self, right? The ego, and all of the hyphenated self words like self awareness and self accountability, self assessment. There's a long list. It's probably infinite. Today's topic again is profession, and there's two kind of spokes outward, and those are you either work for someone else or you work for yourself. So you either have a career or you're an entrepreneur. And I think it's helpful for context at the beginning of this episode to say we're both entrepreneurs pretty much our whole lives. We cut our teeth working for somebody else for a little while and then discovered that, I can do this on my own, and ended up figuring out what that meant. And both of us had, I would say, a tremendous level of success financially as well as otherwise. And we're both dads. We're both athletes. We both have at least relatively speaking, conservative worldview. And so that's the context from which the content for the rest of this episode is going to come. And I always have fun talking about this because of what I spent my life doing, as kind of a career counselor and a staffing executive owner operator. So help to, and you've done so much mentorship over the years with young people and older people and people from different walks of life. So we both really like to serve other people. And really what we're trying to do here is say, we've got all this life experience. We've made all these mistakes. We've had these failures and these successes. What if we could condense that and help somebody that was just coming up upon some sort of challenge or hardship, kind of fast track it through that experience? That would make us feel pretty good. So
Mhm.
I'll toss it over to you, Jim.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for starting off with our framework. Right, we refer to it as a radiant thinking,
Hmm.
and it all starts with ourself. That's the you use often. You refer to the center of your hand as ourself, right? Our self awareness, our self evaluation, and so on. And then this radiates out as we think. So and then of course we have in these areas of our life, right? Worldview, which we covered last week, health, week before, right? And how that, particularly as a man, and it affects everything we do for us to be our best self. So I think, geez, every time we start off one of these calls, we say this is the most important area.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but let's face it, as a man, our profession, our career, it's our self identity. It's who
Hmm.
we are,
Yeah.
and I think even more so than a woman, because a woman, not for good or for bad, right? It's just different. So much of what we our self worth is based on our career, our income, our status. All that is, I think, very much part of being a man, particularly at different stages of your life, right? Mid 30s, early 30s, 40s, and 50s. And in our case, we've had, like you said, we've had businesses, we've had careers, and we're entering this different phase. Um, and that's what we're all about, is sharing that. And I'm going to mess it up, but one of my favorite quotes is, what the world needs more right now than ever before is not experience. It needs wisdom, and that's
Yeah.
really what this whole podcast has become, is us sharing our wisdom. Not that we claim to have all the answers, not that we know we can predict the future, but we do have enough experiences in our life that we can share some lessons that we've learned that make it easier for the next uh, for people that haven't experienced those. So
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about people have another gear. I think all of us probably have another gear. I don't think you could ever max out your performance, whether that's professional performance or personal performance or, athletic performance, whatever the case might be. And as I've spent my entire adult life talking to people that are contemplating professional change, you get deep into the shit, man. If you really care about what you're doing and you really are interested in helping, you can't do professional development with someone without getting deeply involved in what drives them personally.
yeah,
And you made the statement that our work is our identity as men. I think that's yes, but it's also, yeah, that's also could potentially be a problem. And I think a lot of us, especially aspirational people, people that are, you know, uh, high achievers, you can lose yourself in your work to the extent at the expense of your relationship with your wife, at the expense, all of a sudden you wake up one
yeah,
day and your kids are 18 and they're going off to college and you're like, what the
mhm,
fuck happened? So
yeah, yeah,
this is a real issue for men because it is how much we make and what we do and what our title is and what our business is all about if we're an entrepreneur. If you're not careful, it can become too much of a part of your identity. I think we have to all learn how to leave the office behind when we go home. And I don't know about you, but I've wrestled with that my whole life.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that you said, I think they're important. Was first of all, one of the things that inspired this whole program is what you just shared with us, and that was that in career counseling or job recruiting, you find that most of the time you have to get into these areas whether they want to or not,
Hmm.
and that's what really inspired this whole program. Also, I think there was a time when we used to separate our professional life from our personal life, and I think things have changed, that
Uh-huh.
you no longer can separate it. Remember, like you referred to, leave it at the office. Well, that's kind of old school thinking. There is no office anymore. It all runs together with social media, and even the politics. Like you said, you think you could leave the politics out of your business, but somebody's going to know which side of the aisle you're on, left or right. By the way, you said a conservative. You're right. I would probably lean more on the conservative side, but I wouldn't consider myself a conservative in terms of the worldview on the politics. Right? I'd like to
Yeah.
see myself more as an independent because I'm a registered independent. But I mentioned that because that it does become part of our profession, right? If somebody finds out that you're on the opposite side of what they are. I'm not suggesting one is right or wrong, but it could affect your career. And I would say that, in this day and age, let's face it, if you're too much of a uh you're gonna lose your job. If not losing your job, you're gonna be limited to how far you can grow with that company because you don't fit the culture. And the culture could be uh so different for one company that you just don't belong there. And
Well, it's interesting, and I think what happens in the professional world. That's the one of the nice things about being an entrepreneur. I was just on the phone yesterday with a coach that I've been talking to for a little while. Haven't engaged his services as of yet, and I may or may not. But um, he was talking about client selection, and he's like, "Oh, one of my must is I don't deal with assholes. I
yeah,
just don't. I don't care how smart you are or how much money you have. I'm not taking your money if you're an asshole."
yeah,
And that makes the group meetings that we have better. It
yeah.
makes my life better. It makes my life easier. And I can't remember the first time somebody told me when I was a young guy, the customer's always right. My
That's
experience has
changed. It's not,
my
it's not
experience
like that
has
anymore. Yeah.
well, I don't think it ever was. I
Yeah,
think
good point.
I think the customer is usually wrong and most often doesn't know what he wants,
Yeah,
right? And your job as an entrepreneur is to try and figure out what he wants with him when
yeah,
you find out that he doesn't know what he wants. Like,
yeah,
I want this, but I want to pay that. Well, that model doesn't exist. If you
yeah.
want all these things, you have to pay this, right?
Mhm.
That's incongruent. That doesn't
Yeah,
make any sense.
yeah,
But The other thing, I don't know that you ever told me the day you woke up while you were working for somebody else and decided, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm doing this on my own. Was that a circumstance that was thrust upon you, or did you make a decision one day?
Yeah, I know that day, that moment very well. But this is a long time ago. I was a cabinet maker, and I remember asking my boss at the time uh, if I could go on vacation, and he said no. And I said, he said, no, you can't go. You can't go on vacation. Basically, it's an ultimatum. If you go on vacation, you're not going to have a job when you come back. And I just remember myself saying, wow, that means the rest of my life, everything I do, I have to run by somebody else, right? That I
Hmm.
can't control the days. And again, I was young. I was in my 20s, early 20s, probably, right?
Hmm.
One of my friends asked me if I wanted to go to Cancun with them, and I said, "Yeah, sounds like a great time, right? Let's go." And then I went and checked, and he said, "No, you can't go." And I remember I bought my first house when I was 21, so I had a mortgage, I had responsibilities
Hmm.
um, at that time, but that was definitely my first time. Also, something when you were talking, Mark, I think it was I really appreciate too is we talk about these other areas, i- i- and that's worldview, our health, our mental health, our physical health, our relationships with others, particularly women or wives, uh, sisters, mothers, so on, and how that affects our profession. But the big one, and we're going to, I think, do this next week, is money,
Yeah.
right? Our profession is so much tied to our relationship with money. And I don't want to get ahead, but money is a big part of ourself, and we break it into these two areas of scarcity and abundance. So you bet, when your profession, and both you and I were in sales related businesses. So
Mhm.
and we also were sales related businesses, as in, you eat what you kill, right? It wasn't as if we were getting a salary, or um, yeah, everything is sales, but our professions both were related to sales. Everybody's in sales. Some people are
Yeah, I
more
think
aware of it than others, but
no, that's a good way of saying it. Some people are more aware of it than others, but we're all doing it or should be doing it.
even the
It's
software
interesting.
engineers in sales, right? I mean, you have to
You got to
sell.
you got to got
It's
to sell the project. You got to sell the solution.
listen, you have
Yeah.
to be persuasive in one way or the other. So, but yeah, let's get into the profession, because, like I said, we break it up into two areas, and we did that for a reason. And that is, being an entrepreneur is almost like a different conversation than working for a large company, especially and we break that into two groups, right? A corporate company, especially American corporate, and then government. Because, like, my father worked for the state of California, right?
Hmm.
So that's a government job. That's a very different human being
Hmm. Hmm.
than it is a, say, my wife, for example, worked for a large American brand name.
Hmm.
And again, not one better than the other. The world needs everybody equally, but very different in terms
Yeah,
of
it's an
yeah,
interesting distinction. I want to come back to something you said earlier though, because when
yeah,
you're talking about the day you decided you were going to
yeah.
do your own thing, I think every man in middle age, perhaps from 20 something all the
Hmm.
way through 60 something, is is contemplating that. And I think most people are and I say this respectfully because I understand the fear. Most people are scared
Yeah,
because when you move from somebody else paying you and doing what you're told to nobody else paying you and doing whatever the fuck you can think you should be doing,
yeah,
that's a completely different world. And it is scary for a while.
yeah,
But what I try and do with people, and maybe I should pull back on this, I don't know, but when I see somebody who is absolutely miserable at their job, who's also gifted at something because they've been getting paid handsomely to do it by someone else
hmm,
on someone else's behalf, and I spent a lot of time, Jim, when I moved from permanent placement to consulting, all those consultants used to be employees and they all had stories about why they were consultants now, right?
mm,
And most of them were very glad they did it, right?
mm,
And because of what you said, I got to spend the rest of my life doing somebody else's task,
yeah,
asking somebody else's permission.
yeah,
And quite frankly, and this is going to sound arrogant, but so what? I could be accused of being arrogant on occasion. I found myself working for people that were stupid, that didn't know as
Oh
much as
yeah.
I knew,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah.
what the fuck am I listening to this guy for?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that conversation with one's self, wrapped up in money, wrapped up in identity,
Yeah.
is fascinating. And I think, we were talking earlier about how might we help someone. Well, that's definitely one of the ways. If you're having that conversation in
Mhm.
your head, we've had that conversation thousands of times. I've
Yeah.
had that conversation with thousands of people, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of common threads there.
Yeah.
Not everybody's the same, but there's a lot of common threads there.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, I want to, you said a couple things I think are kind of just to put things in context. Because, like you said, you're an entrepreneur that was hired by uh, employers, right? So most of what your work was finding talent for typically, I imagine, a large corporation, larger companies, right?
Yeah,
So
both
even though
large,
you're an
large and
entrepreneur,
small.
okay, but small is what? If they're hiring you to find talent, they're not that small. Otherwise, they'd be going to Home Depot and picking up the guy in the parking lot.
Yeah, I'd
So
say
it's
there'd be a couple hundred employees and a few tens of millions of dollars
that's
at
not
the very
small
at the very low end.
right. That's not small
Mhm.
in the world of small business. But I don't want to get off topic. But what I'm suggesting is you're an entrepreneur, but most of your expertise was and we're using it more and more, but you were their agent, right?
Mhm.
You were putting a higher value on them than they were putting on themselves.
Yes.
And no different than a professional athlete, say playing in the NFL. It's the agent that goes and negotiates the contract. It's
Mhm.
the agent that puts a value on what that player can do
Mhm.
at that moment in time. So, and then, but something you said, I think it's important that we almost need to add it to the framework here, and that is we only had it in two categories, right? Entrepreneurship and employee, and then we did corporation and government. But you just mentioned consulting, and that has
Mhm.
become such a part of business, especially if you're in your later years, right, where you've accomplished something and you don't need to work uh, for hours or for titles. Uh,
This is a category that gets often,
yep.
it needs context because everyone believes a little bit different about it. So when I use the
Yeah.
term entrepreneur,
Hmm.
independent consultant, freelancer, solopreneur,
Hmm.
I mean the same thing.
I see.
Well, it's somebody who is, to use your phrase, and I love it because I use it all the time, is only eating what he kills,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That can have those phrases I just used, they get bantered around on LinkedIn and in the marketplace. And I think it's kind of like, we said in a previous episode, if I'm going to talk to my daughter about feminism, the first thing I'm going to do is say, what is your definition of feminism?
Hmm.
So if you're going to use the word, not you, but anyone's going to use the word freelancer or independent consultant, let's just attach to that. Okay, why are you distinguishing between those two, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's just you know point point to be made.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And then
I
the other
mean,
one is money, right? There's different stages where you can afford to do things that you can't do at different times in your life. So much of our profession depends on um, what your financial situation is, right? How much of this do you do because you have to, or
mhm.
because you choose to? And
I personally, and again, in my experience, which is broad and deep in this particular topic, I think that um, most people don't have the ability to discern between, when it's time to jump and when it's time to stick around. I think a lot of people that I've bumped into firmly believe inside that they are doing what they should be doing because of what you just talked about, your
Mhm.
obligations to your family, your mortgage payment, your car payment, the electric bill, putting some savings aside. I think that in many cases is prudent, it's wise, but in many cases it's also just like, no, you're using that as an excuse,
Mhm.
because I know you've got 6 months of living expenses in the bank. You've got 3 years of living expenses in the bank. You're
Mhm.
just hedging your bets. It's an
Right.
interesting conversation because I don't try to move people from one to the other, but I try to make people look in the mirror and say, look, because it's part of what I do when I'm helping someone as an agent, right? It's
Mm.
this agency thing is to some extent getting people to see things about themselves that they can't on
Mhm.
their own. The mirror, they need a mirror,
Yeah.
or recognize, and perhaps they're not giving themselves enough credit for how good they are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that being in that place of uncertainty is a really challenging place to be, because if you cave into the conservative view, not politically but economically, and that is it's too risky to go out on my own,
Mhm.
well, you're leaving the whole potential part of your life on the table. That's
Mm.
never ever all that investigation, all that learning new things, all that new challenges. You're basically saying, I'm going to take the conservative approach to life. And maybe you should, because of who you are. But there are
Mhm.
a lot of people that don't have to do that, that believe they do. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it all makes sense. And again, just going back to what we start off with ourself, but self awareness too. That if i- if one of these areas gets, let's just say, starts dominating your life. Let's just say your health, right? Say you have bad physical health, something goes wrong. It's going to affect your profession.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question. And even if your mental health is not right,
Mm-hmm.
if then that's going to eventually affect your profession, which affects your money, relationships with other, and even worldview. If you're too wrapped up in it, or oblivious to what's going on, that can affect your career as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unfortunate that we live in a world today where you have to be a lot more careful about what you say. And I mean,
you
and I,
do. Everything is
yeah,
connected.
yeah,
The
yep,
connectivity, and we talk about the framework, but it is about alignment, about aligning, and balance, like anything.
mm-hmm,
So these
mm-hmm,
things are going on whether you're aware of it or not.
mm-hmm.
And I think what we seek to do is to have a better self awareness of how this could be affecting your profession, if
You
that's
know,
your priority
yeah,
at
yeah,
that
no,
stage in your life, right?
and one like slice of that is when I've often worked with people where I would put a candidate into an organization on a temporary basis, on a contract basis as a consultant, and I
Mhm.
would I would pay that person and I would build the organization, and then the organizations occasionally would come 3 months, 6 months in, particularly with someone that was gifted, and say, what's it going to take for me to hire that person from you, right?
Yeah.
Very, very interesting conversation. And I tell most candidates what's going to happen. Trust me, I've seen this. You're going to go, and Monday, you're going to go in, if you choose to do this because you want to get off the contractor risky roller coaster, because you think permanent employment is a more secure position, which
Mhm.
is bullshit. There's no such thing as job security. It's a myth. You're going to go in on Monday, and you're not going to leave at 5. You're going to leave at 7, because they're going to tell you to stay longer, and you're not getting paid for those extra 2 hours. That's number one. Number two, you're going to be pulled into all kinds of meetings that you weren't even involved in before.
Mhm.
And the politics of the organization are now your responsibility. You're no longer the independent guy that comes in to do a thing and leaves when he wants because he's so good at what he does. And
Yeah.
you're going to be miserable. Okay. And you're going to call me or someone else, if you're too embarrassed to call me back, 3 months max.
Yeah.
And you know how many of those people called me back complaining about the decision they made? 90% of them, you
Interesting.
know?
Let's talk about self identity in relationship to your profession or career, because I do think that probably plays more into it than we're aware of as well, right? The
Mm-hmm.
self identity of carrying that logo in on your business card or on your LinkedIn profile. Your identity is attached to a particular brand or a corporation. And I'll just share kind of a personal story, because it's interesting when somebody asks you, "Hey, what do you do?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, not only is that a loaded question, but you have, like anything, about probably 30 seconds or maybe 15 seconds
Yeah.
to answer that question in a way that conveys to them, either what you want them to believe, uh, or maybe, Yeah, there's a lot there, right? And so
There is.
I've have had fun even recently. So you know, again, I have a number of different projects, right? I don't want to, but when somebody asks me every time, well, I even to the point where I have fun with it because I'll start even before the event,
Mhm.
kind of like just like when I was playing rugby or football, right? Preparing myself because it is game time. It is,
Yep.
you know, what no
Yep.
matter where you're at, it is. It's a networking event. It doesn't matter what it is. When that event starts and somebody walks up to you, hey, how you doing? What is it that you do, right?
Mhm.
And how you answer that, and
Yeah.
and I'll just again, I don't want to get too off track, but I if depending on the person and you know how much the mood I'm in, I'll say, is it what I do? Like, how do I make money or what I do? Because
Mhm.
it is two separate questions, right? The assumption is they're one of the same, but that's actually not always the case, right?
Not always. No, not always. I
Yeah,
think it reminds me, I got two real funny, kind of not funny, but asides. When my father was an airline pilot, and
yeah,
so when he went to work, he put a uniform on and a
yeah.
hat.
Interesting. Yeah,
He was our baseball coach up until I was 12. So when he would come to the game and he knew he had to leave right after the game was over to go right to the airport, which he did on a few occasions, he took his epaulets off. He didn't wear his hat. So he just had a black pair of pants and a white shirt on. He could have been anybody. He could have been an insurance salesman. He never wanted anybody to identify him by what he did for a living. And he always told us, if somebody asks you what your father does for a living, you tell them I work in the sewer. I'm an environmental waste engineer, you know, and he would make a joke about it because he didn't want us to be identified by what we did. He wanted us to be identified by who we were. And
mm,
that's been indelibly etched in my DNA my whole life. The second side is career related, but I had a buddy who was really successful years ago, and he started another new company after he sold his last company. And I went to visit him in his new office, and he handed me one of his business cards, and it said vice president. And I said, dude, what do you mean vice president? You're the founder, you're the president. He goes, yeah, but nobody shoots the vice president.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mentioned. I thought of my dad again working for the uh, state of California, or it actually was it wasn't just the state of California. It was the Lawrence Livermore Lawrence uh, Livermore Berkeley Labs. So, but his message was never talk about money.
Hmm.
That was his thing. You never ever talk about money. You don't tell people how much money you make. You don't that is like sacred. You don't talk
Yes.
about money, which
Yes.
is it reminded me of what maybe what your dad was doing. You don't want to give that. But these days, I don't know if it's like that. I don't know if you can hide that anymore, right? Our careers become such a part of uh of who we are.
I love what you said in I think it was the last podcast. You like to lead into a new introduction in a relation by asking where you grew up, where you from.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's a much more appropriate first question when you open
Yeah,
up a
yeah.
conversation.
I never thought of it. You're right. Wouldn't that be a better way to approach somebody instead of what do you do?
Much
It's
it to
you know
me,
I'm really glad I never thought about that. It's kind of
yeah.
kind of shitty question,
It's
right?
a shitty question, man. It's invasive. And the other thing about my perspective on that is when I was a recruiter, I had to ask people what they made, right?
Yeah,
I had to. It was a question of when in the conversation. And
yeah,
I got to tell you, Jim, this is a true statement. I don't know how many people I represented over 30 years, but a
yeah,
shitload of them, right?
yeah,
Like not a couple, a shitload,
yeah.
right? I remember one person when I said 5 or 10 minutes into the conversation, what do you make? He said, well, hang on a second. I have my W-2, which was just last month
What
for
do
the
you
end of the
make?
year.
How much money you make? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah. As a recruiter, I have to know that, right?
I'm sorry. I lost I lost the context. But anyway,
No, no. As a recruiter, part of my
yeah,
representation is I know what you're making now and I know how much you want to make. And that's my
yeah. It's a very
responsibility is to
personal
negotiate
question,
that.
but that's your job.
That's why I'm bringing it up because
Yeah,
in what I did, there's no way around that. If you don't ask the person how much
yeah,
he makes, you can't do your job,
yeah.
right? So when I do ask that question, I remember one person in 30 years that actually said to me, and this number's wrong, I'm making it up, but it's just for specificity. I made $131,757.42 is exactly, that's what I want to know. No one else does that.
Interesting.
Everyone leads with circumstances and conditions that have put them in a position where they're not making as much money as they're worth. It's a fascinating conversation. It's
Wow.
sometimes it's true, most of the time it's not. I'm like, I don't give a shit about the circumstances. At some point, you're going to fill out an application that says, "What do you make?" And if the number you put on that application is different than the one you tell me, I look like an asshole. So we're
Yeah.
not doing that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a
No,
fascinating
but it's
conversation.
very, relevant to our topic today about profession and our
Yep,
self-worth, right?
yep.
Because so much that number, once you have it, you've just made a pretty good assessment and opinion of what he's worth
Mhm,
to the
mhm.
market. So yeah, again, it just keeps going back to
You can
uh,
circle around that conversation because it's contextual. But there are
yeah,
always conditions, there are always circumstances, there's always the economy, there's
yeah,
always,
yeah,
I was part of a layoff. The only thing I want to know if you're part of a layoff is, was it just you that got laid off?
yeah,
Because that's
yeah,
not a layoff.
yeah. Well, let's face it, there are circumstances where
Always.
you lose your job and that, but yeah, so yeah, kind of going back to that. In fact, even recently, and this is the last couple of weeks, I mentioned I went to a couple just functions, whether it's business functions related to my industry or even personal friends and functions. And I find that if you don't lead with what you do for your career, how you make money, uh, it's a better conversation. You get to
Oh
know
yeah.
people, and the best, most recently one is I went there and I was at somebody's home, really really nice home, and he never asked me, and I never asked him,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I look forward to seeing him the next time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't walk away and say, "Oh, I think he did." I kind of knew because I heard, but I didn't ask him. Well, what do you do? And this and this and that. And it's a good place to be if you can get to that point in your life where you're secure enough. You have enough self confidence. Keeps going back to the selves, right? Where you don't have to lead with yeah, trying to uh, validate yourself based on your career, your title, or whatever you do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a
Because those are typically the worst humans, right?
it's a very good point. And some of those people are the worst humans, and some of them are just naive.
Yes,
They're not thinking enough about the implications of what they're saying. And on the flip side, when somebody
that's
asks that
fair.
I don't,
Yeah,
when somebody that asks that I don't know asks me what I do,
yeah.
there's a switch that goes off in my head saying, "How can I fuck with this guy? How can I?" It's like,
Well,
what the fuck?
so let's have fun. Before we wrap this up. But so how do you answer that? And then I'll go next, right? But when somebody
I
says, because when they ask you, you can give them two or three answers, right? But both of us could.
It depends
So
on the context. If it's a completely inappropriate thing to do
no,
because you don't know me, and the
no,
first
no.
thing you
If
want to.
somebody that you just met
Mhm.
appropriately, whether it's a business networking function or whether it's a party of a friend or whatever it is, and they ask you, "Hey, Mark, my name's Jim," and you say, "My name's Mark." What do you do, Mark? What do you say?
Yeah, I probably would say, and I've said this before. Let me ask you this: Are you truly interested in what I do this early on in the conversation,
So
or
your answer
are
would
you
be you ask another question. You
or
don't
you
answer the question.
or are you just uh, a little bit confused about how to begin this discussion? Because what I do is simply a part of me, but who I am is something I'd
And
rather
you do that
speak
every
to
day
you
right
about.
now.
I do it a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
I do it a
Okay. I'm
lot.
not questioning. So what's the answer then? What do you do?
Yeah, it's to your point, it's a bit of a challenge. I say I've been in the career development space for most of my life. I
Hmm.
spent 30 years as a staffing owner operator, sold a
Hmm.
couple companies, and now I'm leveraging that to help people in career transition through coaching.
Okay. Good. No wrong answer, but also the value of an agent, right?
Mhm.
Because I could probably, and in fact, I do this now intentionally. I introduce people uh, one because I think it's easier for somebody else to introduce yourself and tell you what you do
Mhm.
than somebody else. So like I could probably do a better job of introducing you. We'll say that for another call. And you could probably do a much better job after I go of introducing myself because it just needs work. And
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not like
and
there's a wrong answer. It's like anything. This is back to the agency, right? Mark, a good agent is going to help you get real clear on how you convey that information and what it is that you want to convey based on that person. So
well, and you're also, it's more likely that you're going to see me as the world sees me, and I'm going to see me as I see me.
that's right.
And I'd rather be seen as the world sees me, depending on the situation and what I'm trying to accomplish, you know? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think
But
you
an
do.
intro is so like I went to an event last Thursday night. It was a NKBA event, right? National Kitchen and Bath Association, and I'm a membership chairperson. So say I'm like hosting the function with
Mhm.
the other. There's four of us total, right? The president, the other areas. So there's somebody that I invited to this function, and I was introducing him to different people. Hey, this is uh, David. He's just met him, and then I said, before I tell you, before I explain, I'll do the best I can, but I'll let David explain it more in detail. I kind of set it up. It helps a
Mhm.
lot
Oh yeah.
because it
Yeah.
gives
Well,
that person a chance to think about what to say, but also uh, it's a basis of where the conversation goes. This is a business function, so it's obviously related to business, and then it turns into some fun stuff too, right? Like where you're from, and but
yeah, well, I just told you, we got to wrap this up, but I
yeah,
just told you that this morning, I introduced my brother to another friend of mine, professional friend, who's,
yeah.
both of them are very well skilled in their
Yeah,
respective
I,
areas,
I
but
was talking a live introduction, not
yeah,
like what this is. You're walking up to somebody, so
I got you. I got
yeah,
you. We
yeah.
just,
So
we don't do
yeah.
as many of those as we used to, but
No, I mean, but it's like you said, it's a good exercise. So mine right now is I'll if again depending on like, but then I'll say, and it's I'm sure it's terrible. It's so bad that I'm almost embarrassed, even as you are. You get uncomfortable, right? What do you do?
Mhm.
So I'll say, well, I'm an inventor.
Mhm.
And why do I say that? Well, because it's true, but it's also one of those words that people, somewhat intriguing, like people like, oh, that's cool. What the fuck does that mean? I don't even know what that
Yeah,
means.
you don't know that
I don't even really know what it means.
it gives you a lot of room to play. Yeah, it
Yeah,
gives you a lot of
yeah,
room to play. But yeah,
yeah,
no, it's I mean, we could talk on this topic for hours upon hours upon hours, but I
yeah,
think it's a good discussion. There's a lot more we can cover in another episode, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, this people that are in career transition are struggling with big decisions, and I think this rolling out this agency concept is
Yeah,
wonderful.
but it
I
doesn't
think
have
that's
to
a
be in
great idea.
transition. It can also just be being better at what you're doing now and being
Mhm.
better at branding yourself. I think
Yep.
self branding is really important. Being better at how you do your LinkedIn profile, how to put
Mhm.
yourself out there. So
Yep. Yep.
good call, Mark. Like you said, let's wrap this one up. So
Sounds good, Jim. We'll talk to you next week.
okay.